And welcome to episode 43 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. On tonight's programme, we're going to be... let me flip that across there, and I'm going to be talking about Coast to Home, a photography shoot I did for Castle Douglas High School Young Enterprise Group, and the fun we had down at the beach on a cold, miserable day in November. Also, in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page, we've had a couple of people post images for critique. So I will be giving feedback to VG, who had a pendant with a starfish, was looking for ways to photograph that, and Stacey sent in a photo of a couple of old cameras shot against a black background. So, this is what we're going to be talking about this evening. Meanwhile, here we are, live on Facebook. Leave a comment. Let me know you're here. If you're not a regular or it's the first time you're here, then let me know where you're from as well. It's always good to get a sense of where everybody in the world is actually tuning in from. If you find these podcasts particularly useful or would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the way to help. Right, okay, well, it looks like we've got a couple of people in already. Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Maggie, that's my wife, says hello everyone. Rosie, good evening everyone from the wet and windy Isle of Whithorn, which is in southwest Scotland. Stacey, good afternoon. Kim and Maggie, wet and bitter cold here in Pennsylvania. Hope you're all dry and warm. Sandra says, hello everyone from Birmingham. That's in England. Brian, hi Kim to all who are watching in here. Brian's from Dumfries. And Lucas, who I think, are you based down in Devon? I think it was. Anyway, it says, good evening everyone. And Jill's come in with hello everyone as well. So great, I have people. I have an audience. It's worth carrying on this evening. Right, so comments are working. Leave your comments as we go. If you have questions, if you want to comment on any of the images that are coming up, I will periodically be checking in on the comments so I can kind of answer as we go. Well, it won't be exactly as we go. I don't keep them permanently open because then I get constantly distracted, but I will keep looking in on them. So I will reach them eventually, hopefully. Oh, right, Lucas has said he's London. Can't remember who's in Devon. Maybe it was Nuria in London. Right. So, yeah, okay, let's make a start. What I'm going to talk about this evening is a Castle Douglas High School group. Actually, I'll just flick back for the moment. Some of you may remember a few months ago I talked about a sort of Mad Hatter's Tea Party I did for Castle Douglas High School. Now, Castle Douglas High School is the high school in Castle Douglas. Fairly obvious, I suppose, which is the town in which I live. And for about 3 years in a row, I kind of got roped in to helping out their young enterprise group. Now, what happens basically is each year, might be different this year under lockdown conditions and what have you, but traditionally what was happening was each year, the final year students would, those who wanted to take part in it, would be given the opportunity to form a group where they had to come up with a product, create it, market it, and raise money for charity. And several of the schools in Dumfries and Galloway would take part, usually around about 10 or so schools in the region would take part, and then those who then, you know, maybe the best one or the one sort of won the regional award would then go on to sort of take part in the Scotland-wide awards as well. So in the previous one that I talked about, the high school pupils, students had created vintage they were using old vintage plates to create cake stands. The following year, a group decided that they set up a company called Coast to Home. And basically what they were doing was they were making artwork out of stuff you find on a beach. So from pieces of driftwood, shells, pebbles, that kind of thing. So I sat and had a meeting with them to talk about the kind of promotional photography that they would want. And ideas were sort of bounced around, and eventually what they came up with was they started off with the idea of a bit like Friends, the TV series, where you have a sofa which everybody sort of sits down and gathers around, except for the idea of having it down at the beach. So you kind of create this little domestic scene, which should be in a home, but you have it on the beach, and then that kind of links in that coast to home idea. And this was the photo we ended up with. Now, to run, what I'll do first of all, I think, is I'll run you through some of the setup photos, because we didn't actually start with this, this one, as you can imagine. So what we did was first of all, further up the beach, we decided to try everything out. And this was just sort of an ambient light shot. It's a dull, overcast day. It was kind of threatening to rain. It was once or twice, I think actually just after we arrived, it did start spitting with rain, and my heart sank, and I thought, is this just going to be a complete washout? Fortunately, it paused for a while, paused for long enough for us to do the shoot. So you can see from here the kind of stuff that they've got. So, this one's some, various shells. This one's some bits of shell, sea glass that you can find, bits you find on the beach, and old bits of worn pottery. Here you've got some shells and again bits of driftwood, I think, sort of made appearances. So these were the kind of things that they were creating and then selling. So we did a kind of a sort of quick, okay, let's set this up, let's organise everybody, and we had a little coffee table, had a standard lamp, and a sofa. Oh yeah, actually, if you look down in the corner here, you can see one of those which has got bits of driftwood on it, as well as stones and bits of shell. So then the next thing to do was try and set up lighting. So there were plenty of students about, so I didn't worry about getting a light stand out. I just handed one of the off-camera flashes to one of the students and said, "Here, hold that," pointed in that direction, which was an awful lot easier than messing around with a stand. I must admit, I would recommend have a person on hand who's happy to stand there and point the flash at people. It makes life a lot easier. So realizing it was a dull day, and I suppose if we flip back to that, the lighting is very, very flat. I wanted to kind of introduce a sense of lighting. So you can see here, off to one side, the light just kind of catching into the corner of the lens here. And then that's sort of lighting them up a bit. And you can see her face is getting lit up a bit more, a little bit of shadow, a little bit of depth going on. The next thing I did was I put an off-camera flash up inside the standard lamp. So I just sort of literally kind of pushed it. There wasn't a bulb in there, so we just sort of pushed it around. And what I liked about that was the way the light then kind of, you can see it falling down on Amber's hair here and lighting up the lad's shoulder and stuff like that. So having that, then you go, well, actually, I like that. That gives it an even more kind of domestic feel to it. And then when you add in the flash that the young lad is holding, as well as the standard lamp, you've got a 2-light setup, as well as the ambient light on the beach. So this was pretty much our setup, and we took a few photos like this, and I thought, okay, this isn't bad. This is pretty much what we wanted. This was the stage we got to. The tide was kind of coming in a bit closer, and we thought, well, okay, what happens now? Here you can see hand just cutting into shot here with the flash. But then it turned out that the lad who was in charge of bringing the wee sofa along said that it didn't really matter if the sofa kind of got trashed. I think it was only going to be thrown away at the end anyway. And so that's why we started off at the top of the beach, and then we moved down much closer towards the sea. But as the tide came in, suddenly, you know, there's splashing kind of coming around the feet and what have you. You can see here Amber letting out a scream because it's very cold and she's just got a feet full of water. But we realised that the lad holding the flash was then going to, because if he was further off the left, was just going to get soaked. So essentially what we did was we swapped everybody round. So if you compare it to here, you can see the standard lamp and Amber are here on the right. We swapped them over to the left. So essentially mirror imaging everything. So we could have the lad over on the right. And then that allowed us to get the lighting set up that we wanted. And there was this terrible, and what I was really looking for was I didn't want a shot where, like on this one, the tide is out. You know, we've already decided that it's okay for the water to be kind of hitting the sofa. So I wanted to get a shot of the water at their feet, or ideally the water line running almost directly through the middle of the sofa. Unfortunately, for a wee while, every time the cold water hit, Amber let out a scream or pulled a face, and I had to kind of say, look, I know it's awful, but you know, we're not going to get the shot unless you can kind of keep a straight face. And bless her, she was absolutely wonderful, and eventually we got this shot. And if you look really clear, now you can kind of sort of see the gritted teeth behind the smile, but she was fantastic. And so that, and you can see then what we've got. I've got the line of water running right through the middle of them. So that essentially gave us the shot we wanted. And if I just pull up, this is the edited version. Now, a couple of changes you can see in the edited version. First of all, I've done a sort of slight colour shift, white balance shift from the yellows into the blues, and then brought out details in the shadows as well. But I think the biggest thing is the difference in the lamp. Two things going on with the lamp. First of all, part of the problem here was because the way the flash was sitting in it, there's a bright hot spot up in the top corner. Now I didn't want that in the photo, so what I did was I essentially copied the left hand part of the lamp, flipped it and stuck it over on the right. So when you look at this version, we've now not got that bright white hot spot. And then the other thing is you might notice in this one, basically the stand's coming out of the top of the middle of Amber's head. And maybe you didn't notice it, maybe you noticed it straight away. I didn't notice it at the point I was taking the photo. I was too busy trying to get the tide and worrying about whether there was going to be screams or yelps, or whether I was actually going to get soaked by incoming waves at the same time. And then afterwards, whilst I liked the layout, I liked the expressions, I got everything right, I didn't like the fact that it now looked like she was wearing a sort of strange headset. So the other thing I did was I essentially cut it out within Photoshop and moved it slightly to the right, and had to lengthen the stand itself because it only had the height from her head. But that basically is what gave us the shot. Now, the other thing about the shot is it's, as you see it, it's sort of slightly bigger than you need it. There's more room on either side where there's not a great deal happening. Most of the stuff's happening in the middle. And that's because I had to kind of sort of allow for different uses of the photo. You know, that if it was sort of going to be used more like a banner, or something like that. I could sort of zoom in. I could sort of chip a bit off the bottom, chip a bit off the top. You've still got it, and then you've got a kind of wide length. So what we did know was that there was a good chance, if we got a good photo, that it was going to end up in Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine. So there's always a chance that you might get a double page spread. So to allow for the idea that it could work in a more kind of cinematic mode, landscape mode, had to be there. But at the same time, it works quite well if you actually crop it in more square as well. And in the end, that's what happened. Is it wasn't just a case of getting a picture on the inside. We actually managed to get onto the cover. So, and where are we? So, and here we go. Dumfries and Galloway Life, March 2017 issue. So this came out about 3 months after we actually took the photo. And you can see it made it onto the cover. Hidden grimace, wet shoes, and photoshopped lampstand, all intact. So yeah, success all around. I don't think the sofa ever really made it out properly. A couple of behind the scenes photos for you. No, not that one. Not that one. Where are we? Yep. So, my friend Alan, actually, Amber, with the lampstand behind her, her father is Alan Wright, landscape photographer I've mentioned a few times, good friend. He was also there doing some photography and some filming. He took this photo, which sort of shows the setup. Then we've got, and then at the end when we're kind of packing up, the escape, as the tide sort of suddenly came rushing in a bit faster than everybody was expecting. Now, what Alan also did was he did a little time-lapse sequence. So I'll just play that to you because it's only about 30-40 seconds long. So here you can see us starting up the top of the beach, making sure everything's in place, getting the shot we want. And then when we're happy with that, everything gets carried down, plonked nearer to the sea edge. Alan then came down, carried on doing the time-lapse. You can see the tide sort of slowly coming in, and then suddenly it's sort of up to the edges. I'm getting the photo, and before you know it, the water is now actually kind of curling around them at the same time. So that gives you a kind of a sense of what was going on. So a lot of fun. All the high school students were absolutely brilliant, so much fun to work with, and given the pretty lousy conditions we were working under, I thought they were just absolutely fantastic. And then, real bonus, ending up on the front cover of Dumfries and Galloway Life. I think that's always a special treat for them as well. So that was that. So yeah, I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. If you've got questions, throw them into the comments just now, and I'll just go and see if anybody's actually said anything. So where are we at? So okay, Fiji saying good evening. A couple of waves from Stacey to Fiji. Fiji's commenting on the creativity of the artwork. Stacey says someone in the picture was a little serious. Well, so it all depends whether you're getting water splashed around your feet or not. I mean, the photo was actually taken, I think it was the middle of November, so winter was upon us, and we are in Scotland, so the water's not particularly warm. VG likes the editing, as does Stacey. And Sandra says, how long did it take to complete all our editing in Photoshop? To be honest, I don't really know. There are some things which are pretty straightforward. I mean, a lot of the photoshopping is once you know what you're doing or what you have to do, then you kind of plod on and get on with it. And once I worked out that the best way around that lamp problem and having the hotspot was just to sort of copy the other side, turn it, and paste it in. That in itself might only take anything from a couple of minutes to 20 minutes. It wouldn't take that long to do. But then there's the problem. It isn't so much in just doing that bit, it's working out that that's a solution. I might first of all tried darkening down or seeing if I could paint in that bright white spot before I then sort of worked out actually it would be easier if I just copied the other side and flipped it. Similarly, once you realise that the stand is sort of coming out of the top of Amber's head and you need to move it to the left, or to the right in the picture, it's all very well going, okay, I can do that, but then you suddenly realise it's not going to fit that. There's more length coming down the bottom. So then I've got to work out how I'm going to do that, and then I take a piece from the top and duplicate that and put it underneath, and then you're feathering around the edges to try and make it look like it's blending in. So a lot of the time in Photoshop isn't fixing the actual thing you're doing, it's working out how to fix it, because you go off down several blind alleys. You try one thing out and it doesn't work, you try something else out and it doesn't work, or it partially works and then gives you an idea for trying something else out, which then eventually gets you there. So it's as much really about sticking with it until you get there. And that's true with pretty much every photo. I mean, the more experience you get with the program, the more experienced you become just through playing with these, the quicker you get to the answer. It's like anything. You've got sort of, you're more familiar with the program, just like with the camera. The more familiar you are with the camera, then when you need to solve a problem, the quicker you're going to get to a solution. If you haven't yet worked out how to change the aperture and you're having a problem with depth of focus, then it's going to take you a long time to work out how to solve the problem. If you're very familiar with that, then you just need to turn this bit one way or another, and you solve the problem much more quickly. So it's the same thing with Photoshop. The more you do it, the easier, the quicker it gets. Right, Stacey says, love the coastline. Britain is an island, a lot of coastline, and southwest Scotland, long jaggedy coastline, beautiful part of the country, lovely bits of coast. Mandy's here, evening, and Theanne has arrived. Hello from Florida. Probably hopefully a bit warmer than it is in Scotland at the moment. Stacey concurs, freezing water is not fun. So cool. Okay. So if you have any other questions, put them in. Now we're going to move on to the critique section. Not a lot this week. It's strange how it changes. Sometimes I have so many. We're here for a couple of hours. Tonight I only actually have 2 people have put in anything. To remind you, it is an opportunity to get your photos looked at. The big problem that we all have as photographers is trying to get good, reasonable, effective feedback on our images, because we don't always. We can take a photo, we can put it on social media, and our friends tell us how brilliant it is, but our friends either aren't photographers or they're being nice, they're trying to be encouraging. Nobody wants to really put us down or say something nasty or deflate our ego. So it's very difficult to get real, honest feedback that's going to be useful. Tactful feedback as well, where somebody isn't trying to humiliate you for doing it either. Sometimes there are groups of... I'm chatting to various people in between podcasts. One of the things that's come up is there's a fair few people who sort of watch these podcasts and even interact and submit, who have always found the more experienced photographers just a bit too intimidating to ask, and so they found it really useful to be able to find a corner of the internet where you can put your images in without feeling that somebody's going to look down on you or just do you down for not knowing. I think it's probably one of those things that goes back to school experiences, depending on your childhood experiences, but I think most of us at some point have had that experience when we were growing up of being made to feel stupid because we didn't understand something. And we weren't stupid, we just didn't understand. And we didn't understand because it hadn't been explained to us in a way that made sense. And it's something I actually feel quite strongly about, is there's nearly always a way to explain something to somebody so they can make sense of it. So if I don't understand something, it's because it's not been explained to me in a way that I would understand. It doesn't mean I'm stupid, it just means I haven't understood it yet. So that humiliation we get when we're young, being called stupid because, we dared to stick our hand up and say we didn't understand, I think is a terrible thing. And something I've always been very, very keen to try and not just avoid, but to stamp out, to counteract, really. So the whole point of this corner of the internet with Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres is that it's a place where you can safely submit your images to get feedback, to help you get past the sticking points that you've got. If there's bits you don't understand, ask me, and I will do my absolute best to try and help. Right, okay. So, what do we got? Stacey says, a busy week. I took a bunch of baby pictures on Sunday and a still life with dead flowers, but I haven't gotten round to them yet. Okay, well, actually, still life. Some of you may remember last week I started talking about the notion of doing still life, not for this week, but for next week. I'll come back. I'll talk a little bit more about that after the critique section, but just as a kind of little taster, I've been working on a still life. I'll be showing you next week, and then setting a still life challenge for the week after. So Stacey, if you've already been doing still life with dead flowers, maybe this is a time to sort of watch. Make sure you tune in next week. Pick up as many hints and tips and everything as you can from that before you start editing or deciding whether you want to reshoot or just change what you've done. Right, okay, so where are we? So Rosie says, I recently completed an online course of fine art editing. Cool. So far, I've tried a couple and I'm currently working on an image for a friend. It still needs tweaking, so I'll see if I'm brave enough to submit it next week. That would be brilliant. Please do. Cool. All right. So, and Lucas says, I took some, but it was mainly snaps. I wouldn't call it photography. Well, there is a thing whereby I think the difference between, I would say the difference between a snapshot and what I tend to think of as a more engaging photo, the kind where you sort of hang around and really want to look at it for a while. Essentially, it's a snapshot tells you everything you need to know in the photo there and then, almost immediately. Here's a photo of my lunch. You don't really need to go much beyond that. An interesting photo is one where you look at it and you're going, oh, there's a bit more of a story to it than is immediately obvious. I wonder what was happening just before this photo was taken, or what was happening just after, or what's happening out with the boundaries of the photo. And I think that moment that you sort of start to raise a question, that's really what storytelling is. You're trying to imply more than just what you see. So yeah, that I've kind of mentioned that before. But I can talk again more about that in the future more in depth. So okay, so let's go to let's start with VG. So VG had sent in she got a pendant and sent me a couple of photos where it's a Now, okay, let's see, what does VG actually say? VG says, "Hi Kim, these are photos I took today. Since it was a starfish pendant, I tried it on sand. Would like to know if there are better ways." So let's flip over here. And what you can see then is there's this small black starfish pendant. You can see the cord on it, and she's placed some sand on it, which is a lovely idea. It's a starfish, put it on sand, and that's your kind of starting point. This is the unedited version that VG sent me to take a look at. Now, the two things that strike me really about this are, first of all, is that I think there's too much detail lost in the shadows of the stuff. Because it's black, then it's very easy that it just kind of becomes too black as such. This pendant has, well, you know, has been either molded or crafted or something, and you know, there's little notches in it, so there's texture in there, but we can only see the texture on the top and the side that the light is hitting it. But I would expect that there to be more texture in it. The other is that we can see that it's sort of sharp here, and then it goes out of focus up there and out of focus down here. And that's kind of okay, but I think there's a bit here whereby, which bit do you want in focus? What's the most important bit? And actually, if you're showing this pendant off in a kind of product photography kind of way, then I think you really need to have as much of it in focus as you can. So if I look at your settings on this, it says you took this at f5.6 for a quarter of a second at ISO 200. Now, if you're doing it for a quarter of a second, I'm presuming that you've then got it on a tripod, or you've got the camera resting, because that's way too slow to handhold. That's fine. Now, if you've got it sitting there and you can do it for a quarter of a second, under the same lighting conditions, you could just as easily be doing it for half a second, for 2 seconds, for 5 seconds. So you've got now room to play with the light and the aperture. So 5.6, if you narrow down that aperture, if you narrow it to f8, f13, f16, so say you took it at something like f16, that would give you a bigger depth of field. And what that would mean is at f16, I would imagine, if you get your angle right, you should be able to get the front of the starfish and the back of the starfish sharp all the way through. Now, because you've then gone up several stops or down several stops with your aperture, you would then have to expose it much longer to let the same amount of light in. So, like I said, you might have to do an exposure for five seconds or something like that, or more or less. Until I played with it, I wouldn't know exactly. But it's that kind of thing. But if you've got the camera on a tripod, you should be able to do that. The other thing to remember is if you're doing long exposure, where it's pretty much anything beyond half a second, the actual act of clicking the camera can cause it to wobble. So either have a remote release. You can buy these things, you just plug them inside the camera and click, or you can get Bluetooth versions as well, radio controlled versions, or set the camera for a 2-second timer so that when you go click, within that, by the time it takes, any kind of wobble in the camera has stopped. I was doing that in a shoot I was doing recently, which I'll talk about a bit later. So yeah, you want something. I think you want something like an f16. The other thing is then, so let's just open this in Photoshop a moment. Should have had this open already. So yeah, but while that's opening, the other thing then is that notion of, I think the blacks are just a bit too black down here. We've lost potential detail. Now, depending on where you've got the light, what you might do with this is, if you've got the light, say, coming in from the left, then maybe put a little reflector, and that reflector can be as much as a sheet of paper or a bit of foil wrapped over a board, over on the right so that some of the light is bouncing back. So you have the light coming across and you have some of that light bouncing back and filling in where the shadows are. So if we go into here, I will just quickly, if it will allow me, I will just open in Camera Raw filter and bring up the shadows. Let's see, let's try first of all shadows. Yeah, so if I bring up the shadows, all the blacks, not the blacks, the shadows work best with this. We can see that there's a little bit more detail in here. Now maybe I don't want that with everything. I think in your edited version you kind of cropped in, and certainly if you were doing something like a square crop, you know, kind of nice kind of Instagram style shape, something like that. Then, now, perhaps at this point, if you wanted, you could mask that and then just paint back in around there so that you're keeping it darker around the edges if you wanted. Entirely up to you. You could even put a vignette around the edges to draw more attention. I'll just show you briefly what that would look like. So we go to here and go to optics, vignette. You see darken the corners in, and that draws more attention into the front. And then what I might do, given that this is a little bit more out of focus, you could play around with the texture, deepen up the texture a bit, a little bit of clarity maybe. And because you've lightened up the shadows, you can now keep some of that texture in the shadows as well. So I think there's more here than from the original. Do you see? I think it gives you a better sense of the piece. The other thing being, of course, to, like I say, try and make sure it's sharper all the way through. So hopefully that gives you a sense with that particular thing. But other ways of photographing pendants, you can, you know, well, you can have them being worn. You know, you actually get a bit of neck into the shot. You know, so that kind of context thing. Another option would be, now this isn't a pendant, this is a little mini magnifying glass, but it's got a strap. So a couple of ways you could do this is, you know, if you had a sheet of paper, if I've got it there, you can see the shadow of the webcam here from my light source over there. So let's do it just to one side here. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's flip back a sec so you've got a slightly bigger screen to see this on. And then you can hang it in front and play around with your light source, so depending on where the shadow is likely to fall. But in essence, so I try and do something like that. You know, you can have it in front of a piece of, you create a piece of paper, create it, or you know, a white piece of board, and just have it hanging in front. Maybe if you light it slightly more from the side, you don't end up with a shadow directly back, so you don't have the shadow straight onto it. So that's another way of doing it. Also, do the same thing with a kind of background. But another one is if you take the cord and you wrap it around with fingers, and then you can be holding it something like this. And again, maybe you have a slightly plainer background or something. But the point being is that if you've got the hand in the shot, that actually then gives a sense of size and scale. Because one thing we don't know about this is actually how big this is. It's very difficult to say. From the side, you know, I'm kind of guessing from the size of the grains of the sand, what's a likely thickness of the cord. That actually does look very small. It doesn't look like it's probably more than about an inch. I'd be surprised if it was 2 inches long. So having a hand in shot is quite a good way of just giving it a little bit of scale as well. But you want some kind of blank, non-distracting background if you've got the hand in as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea of different ways that you could maybe play with that VG. Right, okay. So close that and see if we have any other comments. Okay, so VG says, I tried different apertures and ISOs, around 140 pics. We'll check out if there are some better ones out there. I had the light on the left and a silver reflector to the right, but the light was too powerful. I covered it up. Yeah, trying to get the balance. If you're going for as much slower shutter speed in order to then... Well, no, it's still about bouncing the light. It's still, if your aperture is narrower, that will stop too much light coming in. And then you have a longer shutter speed, which lets more light in. So you're constantly balancing. If you try the reflector, if the reflector's bouncing back too much light, you just move it further away. If it's not bringing in enough, you get it closer. Likewise with your major light source. It's how close and how far away you have them. What point does... Okay, actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to switch off this main light for a moment. And so now it's all a bit dark and spooky. Right, got a torch. How much is it lighting up my face? Now I come in like this and it's blowing it all out. It's way too bright. Take it back over here. This side of my face is lit, but it's now not as blown out. And then likewise, if I hold a piece of paper over here, working like a reflector, look at I'm going to say the right side of my face. This the left as you're looking at it. As I bring it closer, you'll see that my face lights up more. As I take it away, it lights up less. So that's what a reflector is doing. And that reflector in this case is just literally a piece of paper. So that's what you're doing here. You're playing around with how far away the lights are and the reflectors are as to how much you're filling in the shadows. So I'm just going to stick the main bit back on. So we don't have to be sitting there under spooky vision. Right. Okay. So where were we? Okay, so VG had noticed the details were visible and she's responding to when I had it in Photoshop. And Rosie likes the idea of the starfish on the sand as well. Oh, Becca's here, evening all, apologies for late entrance. Becca, how dare you turn up late? There you go. That's fine. You'll just have to watch when we get to the end, go back onto Facebook and click start again, or follow it up on YouTube tomorrow. Okay, so where are we? Rosie says great lighting demo. Oh, good, glad that worked. VG replying to Stacey, rock cut pendants got different types, sun, star, yin yang. Okay, so actually, I mean, that's another thing, is if you want to do a set of them together, whether you have them all hanging together, you place them together, you can do arrangements as well. Sandra says, is it a case of a bit of trial and error to get the lighting right for your subject? Always. Well, having said that, I can immediately feel one or two highly experienced photographers screaming at me. In the days before digital, in the days of analog, where you didn't know whether you got your settings right until you were in the dark room and developing it, you had to know about getting your settings right. And at that point, you used light meters. And you either referred to long, complicated charts, or you memorized the charts. People who use these things a lot. The more photography you do, the more you know where roughly your starting point is. You know roughly I'm going to need this kind of aperture, this kind of shutter speed, or because I am coping with X, Y, and Z conditions, I want to prioritize the fact that I've got a narrow aperture or a wide aperture or a slow shutter speed or a fast shutter. So for example, if you know you're going to be photographing somebody who's running, you're going to want to have a fast shutter speed to be able to capture that. Experience tells you that, well, if I'm going to set this to 300th of a second and it's bright sunlight, then my aperture settings are going to be whatever. And you might decide I'll start with 5.6, and then these days you go click, you look in the back and you go, that's too dark, widen the aperture. That's too light, narrow the aperture. So you've got immediate feedback. You don't have to memorize charts or have light meters in the same way. And again, I can hear specialists talking to me, and people I know who work with digitally but will still use light meters. I don't. It's not to say you shouldn't. It's how far you want to go, how prepared you are to go for a particular level where you feel that you're going to get subtleties beyond what you can see either in the back of the camera, or if you've tethered the camera to a laptop or a tablet, what that's showing you. I love the digital age where you can go click and you can look in the back and you can instantly see whether it's too dark or too light. So, sorry, what was your question again? Yeah, so a bit of a trial and error. Basically, with all these things, you take your best guess. Take your best guess, go click, and then look in the back. If you're going to be photographing something where you're only going to get one shot at this, or a couple of shots at this, and you're not going to have time, then you try it out beforehand. So for example, a couple of years ago, there was the Round Britain Tour bike race. It wasn't called that exactly, but anyway, essentially a cycling race. And the finish line for one particular section was in Castle Douglas, literally 100 yards away from my front door. And so I wanted to kind of get a sense of, getting a shot, but I didn't want to sort of have to get my one chance to take a shot only to realise that I hadn't got the settings right. So you then practice. You're taking photos of people in the street under the current lighting conditions just to see how they're moving. So a lot of it's you take your best guess, you go click, and then you make adjustments. And if you don't have the time for it, you try and do as much in advance as you can so that you've already kind of know what your settings should be, so that you've got your best chance of getting the shot you want under those conditions. Right, okay, so where are we? VG says thanks for the demo. And Robert says very interesting shadows. Yep, absolutely, shadows are always fun. Cool, okay, so next picture I want to move on to is Stacey. So Stacey sent in a photo, let's flick over here, of took this a while back, black background and classic cameras. I have these backdrops from Elmer's. I added some front lighting. So what we've got here then is black and silver or black and metal cameras against the black background. And immediately what leaps to my mind here is the fact that it's kind of too black. I think it's a fun idea to take photos of old cameras. They look pretty amazing cameras, and this one on the left here has got bellows in it. So that's your literal kind of zoom and sort of focal point. It's changed. Fantastic. And then this one over on the right is one of those ones where you look down into the top to see what's going on rather than holding it up. So again, a different way of interacting with your camera. So great cameras, a lot of fun, nice to sort of try a photo where you've got the two of them together. So kind of a bit of a still life kind of thing here. But I think the problem is it's a bit like with VG losing detail in the shadows. I think there's too much lost here. Now, it might be one of those things you have to be careful of, that if your a lot of laptop and computer monitors these days are bright. The settings make them brighter than, if you like, real life, or they're certainly their printed counterparts. So you can have a picture which you're seeing plenty of details in the shadows, and the moment it's looked at somebody else's monitor, it just looks very black. And when I look at this on my monitor just now, it looks very black. And so what's happening is there's detail that's being lost into the picture. So really, shooting black things on a black background is kind of a dodgy way to go, unless you are specifically going for that edge lighting kind of idea, where essentially everything is supposed to be black apart from a couple of interesting highlights, where you're just playing literally with lines of light against the black background. In this case, that's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is actually show some of the details of the camera. So perhaps a black background wasn't the best choice for this, or you need some more light behind it. You're lighting it from the front, and that's fine, but some kind of light behind to make it stand out from the background, I think would have worked well. So let's open this in Photoshop. I'll just close that one from VG. Now I open it in here. I'm just going to very quickly take a curves and drag it up, see if there is any detail in the background. Okay, so if I drag this up, we can see here there is a lighter patch in the background, but of course we do that, it becomes very noisy and what have you, so that's no good. So, but what I'm going to do is, just while that's a bit lighter so I can see, I'm going to lasso. Actually, that's probably not quite. Okay, first of all, I'll take a copy of that. Let's go to Camera Raw Filter and Shadows. Shadows isn't doing anything, so I'll take the blacks, lighten up the blacks a bit, and maybe the shadows a bit as well. Now this is making it noisier, but it does allow me to see the background slightly better. So I can hopefully lasso the background. That's not perfect. I'm going to have to go back. You hold down the Alt key, Alt key, just to sort of fill that back in, getting some of these background bits, camera bits back again, and then that bit goes down to there. So I've now got this area here. So let's say what I was to do is I'll create a new layer. Let's go back to the original one, and I'll take a white paintbrush and shoot it across the back, and then just take that down a little bit. So you do something like that, and let's just deselect. So what you can see here now is that with a lighter background, now we've got, maybe you sort of direct it, I'm just doing a stripe like that creates a kind of directed light, gives it a little bit more texture, maybe makes it slightly more interesting. So I'm not suggesting you do this in Photoshop. What I'm suggesting is you actually do something like this in the actual shoot. Create a light for the background. Now, maybe what you might want to do is, you could, if you've got an off-camera flash or whatever light you've got, wrap some cardboard around it, create a little narrow tube, and so you can create a kind of little directional light at the back, but you want to light up the background a bit, add a bit of texture in, and then you can see now how much more these cameras stand out from the background. When we remove that, we can't really see much at all. When we put that in, suddenly the cameras make an awful lot more sense. And given that they're, these beautiful old cameras do have some lovely texture, I think to have them lost in a black background kind of doesn't do them justice. So yeah, do think very much about your background when you're creating. There is a temptation. I mean, I remember, was it last week or the week before? I think Ben had put in some photos of some flowers where the shadows were kind of completely in the blacks. Now, I think he said afterwards there were more details, but I think the way, especially when you're putting stuff on Facebook, Facebook compresses the images, and any details that are sitting in the shadows will be wiped out, so you can't really pull them back out again. But I mentioned then about the fact that if you look at a lot of paintings, then there's very rarely completely black in the back. So I mean, well, talk about old master style paintings, sort of classic, sort of from 16th to 19th century paintings. Very rarely are things completely black. There's often lots of texture in what you think is black is actually just sort of quite textured darkness, but it's not just completely black. So if you ever are going for completely black, you kind of need to be thinking, why do you want it completely black? Does it need to be completely black? Your default should not be completely black. You should only go to completely black if there's a reason for it, rather than just because you automatically do it, I think. So I hope that helps, Stacey. Ideas to play around with. Right, okay, where are we? Okay, Sandra was happy with my response to the trial and error bit about lighting. And Becca says, I saw the difference immediately in Photoshop. Is it Facebook that makes it so black? Yeah, partly it is. Like I say, one of the things that Facebook does is because there's billions of photos being uploaded every month, if not every day, it compresses your photo. And the compression style that it uses is it basically removes, so if you've got two fairly close color pixels next to each other, it will just, rather than make a note of it being, say, 3 different colors, even though they're quite close to each other, it would mark them down as the same color, and then that way it's only sort of one number for 3 pixels. I realise I'm probably going to get into a whole load of technical stuff, which is just most people aren't really going to be interested in. The basic answer is yes, it compresses the picture so that you lose detail. And especially noticeable at the extreme ends. You'll lose detail in the shadows. You will also lose detail in the highlights. So yeah, Facebook, it does. And that's why quite often when I say to people, if you are submitting a picture to me for critique, it very often helps if you can email me the original, because then I can see what there was to play with. If you only send me the Facebook version, or I'm only able to lift the Facebook version off, that's fine if it's just about something like recropping or re-angling or talking about compositional lines. But if you're talking about editing techniques, then it's much more useful for me if I've got the original to refer to. Okay, what have we got then? Yeah, Stacey says horrible compression on Facebook. Lucas says, I think a bit of light behind the subject, just have some contour will do the job. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing is to, yeah, you could even have a bit of light pointing from behind back towards the cameras as well, as Lucas says, would kind of lift the contrast. So, okay, all right. Rosie says, BBGs are very popular in the horse world and can be very effective. A BBG? Black background. Is that what you mean by black? BBG. I'll go with black background until you decide to tell me otherwise, Rosie. So, what is it? So, BBGs, so black backgrounds are very popular in the horse world and can be very effective, but the lighting has to be right. A grey horse is a bonus. This is what I'm aiming for. At some point in the future, I have a black horse to photograph with a view to doing a black background. Okay, if you are going to go down that route, then if you do want to photograph black things against a black background, then what Lucas was talking about having a light behind it is extraordinarily important. That's really the way to go. You can't just light it from the front because details will get lost. You need some kind of separation. And so you need to have light, behind and to one side, either side, reflectors and bits and pieces. You can have the black background, that's fine, but you've got to make sure that the edges of the horse are seen enough so that they don't just blend into the background. That's what will help make it really effective. Maya says, we found that Facebook photos look best when they are 2048 pixels on the long side. In this case, the compression is not as strong. You need to reduce it yourself. Okay, so yeah, that's an interesting one, and it sounds familiar actually. I think I've come across that. That Facebook, when it is reducing things, has certain steps, and so what Mayer is saying here is the optimum width or height if you're doing a portrait, but most people are doing landscape, your optimum width. If you reduce your picture to 2048 pixels wide, then what Facebook does with its compression doesn't affect it as strongly. It's designed to compress at that size. What that means is if you're smaller than that or larger than that, or you're a different size to that, the algorithm doesn't work quite as well and it compresses in a more ugly way, really. So yeah, I'd forgotten about that. That's a great tip, Maya. Thank you for that. So check the comments or scribble down a note somewhere. 2048 pixels is the optimum for. So if you're putting something on Facebook, reduce it to that size and then put it on Facebook, and it's more likely to hold some of the detail. However, having said that, it will still take a chunk out. So if you are sending me stuff, also the other thing is if you're sending me stuff, it's easier for me if you send me the original file. Even if you put the edited version on Facebook, that's fine. But if you send me the original file, then that allows me to kind of see how the editing might have been done differently. Okay, what else we got? Yeah, so Rosie is agreeing that it's the BBG is a black background. And she says the black background will be in post-processing. That's a tricky one as well, because what you will find is if you've got a light background and you make it dark, you're just gonna have an absolute nightmare along the edge of things. I mean, if I place my hand here, when you try and create a black background, but you've got this is going to be kind of white here, and you're going to find it's going to be you're going to be literally pixel pushing as you go. So if you are going to shoot, even if you're not actually sticking up a literal black background, try and get a dark background. You really want to get a dark background. Another option here is actually sort of shooting more kind of at twilight, you know, in a still light enough for you to see, but dialed down. If you have a deep aperture, you know, if you have like a, you know, an f16 or something like that, then that will make it dark enough to essentially darken out everything. And then where you place your off-camera lights, they will be lighting up the horse. So even though there might be a hill in the background or anything else, if there's no other lighting systems, then that will fall into the darkness. Just to remind you, remember the other week I was talking about the Peaky Blinders themed shoot that I did? And if you remember that the ambient light was just a kind of dull all-round plain light, but the images looked much more interesting because I dialed down the settings so that there wasn't a lot of light getting into the camera. And that way, when the lights went off, they lit up where I wanted them to light up, and the daylight didn't interfere with it. But either way, whichever way you go around it, you want to make sure that your background is darker to begin with, and then that way you can darken it down to black if you want more easily. But if you end up with a light background or a very busy background and then try and turn it black, honestly, you will hate yourself for it afterwards. So speaks the man from experience. Okay. Right, okay. So Rosie says, doesn't help that I'm working with PSE 11. PSE? Photoshop Elements. Right. You're going to have to write these things out in full. You never underestimate whether I've had a long day or not, Rosie. Don't use the acronyms, just give me a clue as to what these things stand for, please. Don't force me to work them out live on air. Okay, so hope that helps. Hope that helps Stacey. Hope that helps Rosie. Little bit of fun. Lucas didn't put this photo in for critique at all, but I did want to show it because he did put it into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, which was a lot of fun. He said, headshot taken today in London. Snow is quite rare here, so I had some fun with my son. So I thought this was a lot of fun, but I thought the chances of you getting that right for in one go are pretty much zilch, or I rather do a scratch card, I think, in terms of trying to get the opportunity, your luck level's right on that. So I left a comment saying, how many times did you have to do it to get the timing right? To which he put some smiley laughy faces and said, actually, I was quite lucky. A few shots and job done. So poor boy, walloped with several bits of snow. So I left a comment saying, the sacrifices our children have to make for our art. To which he replied, he didn't want to stop. So there you go, willing participant. So I thought that was brilliant. So thank you for sending that one in, Lucas. That actually put a real smile on my face. Okay. Yeah, you got a couple of nice comments there. Jill saying great snowy shot. Rosie loves the shot, and Stacey also saying cute snowball shot there. So, Katrina has come in. Hi, Katrina. Says sweet, and Sandra, lovely photo, Lucas. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is next week. This is all coming out of Sandra's talk or question from a week or two ago about the idea of doing still life. And part of the problem with still life is it is a massive, massive topic. But I didn't just want to say it's a massive topic, ignore and move on. So it set up the idea of, if you type in still life into Google Images, what you're most likely to come up against is actually still life paintings. And the classic period, the golden period era for still life paintings was essentially your kind of 17th, 18th centuries, from the Italians through, and particularly the Dutch. The Dutch masters from like Rembrandt and what have you, painting still lifes. Very often there were things like food, fruit, flowers, but there was other things as well. So I thought, well, okay, let's have a go at trying to do something like this, to try and create a painting that looks a bit like, is using the same kind of tropes and ideas. So yesterday, my wife Maggie was hugely helpful, massively helpful in helping me to create a setup. Now, I haven't edited the photos yet. I'm not going to show them to you yet. I will just give you a very quick, sneaky, behind the scenes glance of my setup, where what you can see is I've got a board, another board. We haven't brought the fruit out yet. We're just playing around trying to find a bowl, a little bit of cloth. You can see I've got my camera on a tripod, and I've got it tethered down to a laptop over here, so that when I go click, it appears on the screen and I can get a proper sense. Now, the main thing about this is I'm just using a window light. Okay, that what I decided to do was, with this, if you're doing still life at home, that it doesn't have to be about having big fancy lighting equipment. So that's your little teaser. So next week I will show you the results of this, and I will talk through the setup a bit more. I will talk about the problems we had to overcome, decisions we decided to make, artistic and technical, and then having just kind of gone through that and show you, and also any editing techniques that might come up as well. Having gone through that, I'll then set a challenge for the following week. So next week is, I think, the 2nd of February. So for the 9th of February, our monthly challenge is going to be a still life challenge. So it's your opportunity to try and do a still life photo. Now, it doesn't have to be done in, like, the old classic paintings. But really, next week I'm going to be talking about this shoot, but also the notion of still life and how that has expanded beyond what the old masters were doing. And how it kind of overlaps quite often with product photography. I mean, a lot of product photography is essentially a form of still life. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about, which will hopefully give you some ideas. So then the 9th of February will be our still life challenge, and hopefully you'll have a go and feel inspired to have a go at creating your own little still life, and you can send me the photos and we'll look through them and talk about them and see how much everybody's learning off, has learned tips and tricks and can inspire each other. So I hope that you will find that interesting. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this week. Gosh, we're only down to an hour and a quarter. It's one of the shorter ones of late. If you found it interesting, if you would like to support these podcasts, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place to help out. Not compulsory, but always appreciated. These are recorded, they're put on YouTube. For anybody who came in late, who would like to sit down and watch it from the start, by tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, it will be up on YouTube. youtube.com/Kim Ayres. You can find all the back episodes. This is episode number 43. The previous 42 are all up there if you ever wanted to go back and take a look at any of the early ones. I will say that I think I probably it takes me at least until about episode 14 or 15 before I start feeling like I'm getting into my stride a bit. There's an awful lot of looking absolutely terrified into the camera in the first few podcasts. Well, you can always go back and have a laugh at that one if you want. So yeah, YouTube, go and take a look at my YouTube if you want. That's pretty much it. I will just flip over and see if there's any last comments. Okay, so right. Robert noticed the instrument in the background. Says is that a bazooka? Not a bazooka, a bouzouki. And yes, it is a bouzouki, and I play that. So yes, in fact, actually, you know that already because you've left a comment on one of my YouTube videos from several years ago where I was playing one. Katrina says, superb, look forward to this. Good. Mohammed, oh great, okay, Mohammed's new here. Hi Kim, how can we create a starburst effect when we put the lens right straight in front of the sun to have the ideal starburst? Okay, let me have a little think about that one. There are answers to that. I think it's largely to do with go for a very narrow aperture. Go for your f/16, f/22. You don't get starburst effects when you've got a wide aperture. You need a narrow aperture for starburst effects. But I'll tell you what, Mohammed, if you would like to put that as a question into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, then I will double check that information and I'll get back to you and give you a proper answer next week. Rosie says, what do you need to tether your camera? Well, you need a wire that goes from your camera to your laptop or tablet, and then you need the right software on your tablet or laptop to do that. Now, Canon has, if you buy a Canon, you can go to Canon, you can download the Canon EOS software. Your camera, you will already have some kind of wire that came with the camera that allows you to connect it to your computer just for downloading the images. If not, Google your camera and find out what the connections happen to be. They're not all the same, but you can buy them. You should be able to buy a cable for a few quid. But then I know Canon has free software. I don't know about the other. I would be very surprised if you couldn't get hold of some kind of software from Nikon or Sony or Panasonic or any of the others. They'll all have a version of it. But yeah, basically software on the camera so that when you turn the camera on and it's linked to your tablet or laptop, it automatically recognizes it. And what that allows you to do is when you go click, the picture appears automatically on the screen. What it also allows you to do is you can very often adjust the camera settings on the tablet. So you on the software, you can say, well, actually, let's change. So you don't even have to be attached to the camera for it. Now, some of the more modern cameras, which then have Bluetooth or variations thereof, you can get apps for tying it to your phone as well, so you can actually control your camera settings from your phone. So you could have your camera on a tripod in a different room, even several miles away, actually, if you're doing it with your phone and it's all bouncing off modern technology. That's how a lot of people are now doing kind of remote wildlife photography. Even drone photography is kind of working along this way. So whether you need a physical wire or you're sort of doing it via Bluetooth or you're doing it via the internet and phone lines and all the rest of it, there are variations. Lots of possibilities out there. Stacey says, is it necessary to tether? No, you can do things from looking at the back. I just find it very useful to tether the camera because the number of times I've sort of taken a photo and in that little kind of 2 to 3 inch screen that you have on the back of the camera, it looks fine. And then when I get it home, I find that it maybe isn't focused in the right place. Once I've got it in the big screen, that little 2-inch screen wasn't enough to show me that. So, taking a photo of somebody and it turns out their eyes are not in focus, the back of their ears are fine, but their eyes aren't. And as we've talked before about portrait photography, getting the eyes in focus is absolutely the most important thing you have to do. So these kind of things don't always show up on a little 2-inch screen. So to be able to tether it to a larger screen so you can go and double check is very, very useful. So what else have we got? Robert, short and sweet, great podcast. Thank you. Yeah, it's getting longer again. People keep asking me questions. Sancho says, I'm keen to know how to tether your camera as well, as I find it difficult. Yeah, pretty much. I think I've probably just answered that one with Rosie. Katrina says, thank you. Theanne, thank you. Maggie and Maggie too. Stacey, have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful night. See you next week. Jill, thanks. Lots to take in. And don't forget, because these are recorded either here on Facebook or on YouTube, you can rewind them, watch them again, pause them, scribble down some notes. Lucas, thank you. Have a good week. Maya, good night. Stacey says, Nikon has a tether line in kit. Oh, well, there you go. Rosie says, I have the cable, but not the software. I use Nikon, so I shall have a look. Brilliant. And Theanne says, there were 2 articulated art mannequins behind you, and now there's 1. There isn't 2. There was only ever 1, and a shadow. So there you go. Theanne and Becca says good night. Right, so okay, everybody's saying good night, everybody's leaving, so I will see you next week. Get your photos and your questions into the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page so that I can answer your questions and help you with your photography next week. Have a good week. See you on Tuesday. Take care then. Bye bye.